тон има. Don't be afraid, I'm not going to read the whole thing. Добар ден на сите. Добре дојдовте на предконференцијата за Преспа форумот за диалог. Патот кон Брисел. Welcome everybody. Good morning to Paul. Welcome to the pre-conference of the Prespa Forum Dialogue Road to Brussels.
English.
I've been given 30 seconds to open the pre-conference, which is extremely short time to wrap up the 30 years that we've been walking this road to Brussels. So to make it extremely short in the 30 seconds, I will just present to you Minister Bujar Osmani to give his opening speech and introductory remarks, and then we can continue with the panel. Minister, please.
Добар ден на сите, мирдита.
Good day to everyone.
Your Excellencies, esteemed panelists, dear representatives of the media, esteemed guests, dear friends. I am privileged to greet you and welcome you all to today's panel debate entitled Road to Brussels, which was conceived as an introductory and warm-up event to this year's Prespa Forum for Dialogue, scheduled to be held in Ohrid from 16th to 18th of June under the title Shaping Western Balkans' Future in the Contemporary European Security Architecture. It is a special honor for me that today we have managed to get together proven and renowned panelists who, with their valuable contributions in the debate, as well as through their original and profound thought process, or to enrich the event and display to us their outlook on the latest developments and processes in the Balkans, Europe, and the world, thus helping us shape the debates for the lead event in Ohrid next month. Ladies and gentlemen, I am convinced that the morning of 24th February will long remain etched onto our memory. It was the moment when we first heard the news of Russia launching its invasion of Ukraine. The military aggression, which was an act of invasion of a sovereign and independent European country, in just a matter of seconds, shattered all notions we had been nurturing up to the day about the development and future of Europe and the world in the 21st century. From that moment, from that day on, a new era began, not only as a new chapter in global geopolitics, but also a new stage, having multiple direct and indirect impacts on our day-to-day lives. Today, 3 months later, after witnessing a procession of brutal and inhumane acts in Ukraine, and after feeling the attempts to divide and destabilize Europe, we are faced with the challenge of preserving unity and delivering a common response. North Macedonia has made a modest contribution to the wider effort of the EU and other Western democracies to help Ukraine. We have adopted all 5 packages of sanctions imposed by the EU, as well as those previously imposed in connection to the violation of territorial integrity of Ukraine, hence aligning to 100% with the common foreign and security policy of the Union. We have provided humanitarian and other aid to Ukraine, and we have opened our doors for those fleeing the war by lifting the restriction on entry into our country, offering temporary stay for humanitarian reasons, and thereby showing hospitality to around 1,000 Ukrainian citizens already, who are for the most part staying in private accommodation. The relevant institutions have accelerated their emergency planning, and should the need arise and the war is prolonged, we are ready to provide additional refuge and other types of financial assistance. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has catalyzed European and Euro-Atlantic integration further. From 24th of February onwards, NATO has become more relevant than ever, renewing its relevance and purpose. The European Union is simultaneously rediscovering the essence of its own identity as a peace project, with a strong geopolitical dimension added to it. Europe is waking up, it is seeing the reality, and what comes to the fore is the need to close ranks, the need to integrate that part of Europe and the world of those nations that share our values, our ideas and visions. Dear guests, integration into the Euro-Atlantic structures far outweighs the guarantees contained in Article 5 of the Washington Treaty and the availability of European Union cohesion funds. Membership in these two organizations is a confirmation of the values that countries adhere to and strive for. And it is from there, from the lofty principles and values on which these two communities have been founded, that their attractiveness comes from, and the power of those two communities to act legitimately recognized as a global force for good. The future of our community is in unity, unity in values, unity in unwavering adherence to the rules and order. Tolerance, principledness, openness, transparency, mutual respect, readiness for understanding each other and compromise are all intertwined in our social DNA. We naturally belong together, not only in a formal and mechanical sense, but in essential unity, united around common values and principles. That is the source of our common strength. In fact, these ideals include the reason why we set out on the path of reconciliation and regional cooperation, when we concluded and implemented the Ohrid Framework Agreement, the Treaty of Friendship, the Prespa Agreement, the three agreements that form the main pillars of the Prespa Forum for Dialogue, and with the help of which we have achieved internal and external reconciliation, integration and progress. Seeing the many benefits of such an approach and motivated by the desire for others to feel the same, we created the Prespa Forum for Dialogue as a platform whose main function is to promote precisely those values: dialogue, diplomacy, compromise, friendship, peaceful resolution of misunderstanding, striving towards unity, building a capacity to look beyond the here and now and to see the opportunities that await on the other side of the constraints that we have set for ourselves. These principles that the Prespa Forum for Dialogue has been promoting are of great practical use in precisely times such as these. Hence, in these crucial moments in European and world history, we are committed to expanding and consolidating the rule-based order here in the region, which NATO and European Union embody. We strongly support the open door policy for membership of the North Atlantic Alliance and unreservedly support Finland and Sweden joining NATO, being strongly convinced that the enlargement of the alliance will make us all stronger and more united. We demand that the EU immediately opens accession negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania, because we deserve it and because it is a tool to accelerate reforms and maintain stability. We call for all efforts to be taken to promote the status of Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo into EU candidate countries. We support progress being made in the EU accession negotiations on Montenegro and Serbia. We wish and work towards creating a sustainable and substance-filled relationship of the Western Union institutions with Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. These three processes, the enlargement of NATO to the north and the enlargement of the EU to the southeast, coupled with the establishment of a format for advancing relations with the Eastern Partnership countries, are interrelated processes, and their completion is an ambitious feat that requires genuine statesmanship and a heightened sense of demonstrating two noble values, courage and vision. It will be especially necessary in the coming period to show the readiness to break free from the constraints of the seemingly narrow national interests and to think and act for the good of the entire transatlantic community, to overcome short-sightedness and to see the big picture, to sacrifice petty gains to make decisions that will be valued from a historical perspective. In doing so, the transatlantic community will show vitality, adaptability, and unity, and will close or at least greatly reduce the space for negative influences by those factors that do not share the same values as us. Esteemed panelists, in these crucial moments, we are faced with extremely important dilemmas that we need to take on and choices that we need to make. We are aware of the benefits of dialogue, compromise, and integration. On the other hand, we see right before our eyes what results when diplomacy fails and when mutual respect and understanding are missing. The spread of transatlanticism and Europeanization, it has the spread of the order based on values and principles is in the interest of both aspirant countries and member states, but also in the interest of global peace and cooperation. In terms of regional dynamic, to us, the stalling of the EU integration processes, and especially that of North Macedonia, represents a source of systemic vulnerability, the effects of which spill over the entire region. And what is even more frightening, malignant external actors, willingly and skillfully using them to achieve their goals. This was very much at hand and visible when PRESPA agreement was signed. Our view is that at a time when the international rule-based order is wobbling, the EU hesitating towards those who willingly and with their political invest enormous social energy into introducing and implementing European values, rules, and standards is a luxury we must not afford ourselves. We sincerely believe that these are historical times that require firm and timely decisions, not because we are a case to be absurd, but because it is both right and fair to do so, and because it carries a series of multiplying effects on the entire region. Therefore, I repeat, it is an imperative to start the long-delayed accession process of North Macedonia and Albania now, during the French EU presidency, when, if not now. As the history of European integration has shown, in order for the European Union to further expand its global role, it will have to once again first assume its strategic leadership in the enlargement policy, as was the case with a wave of enlargement with Central and Eastern Europe in 2000. The Russian aggression against independent Ukraine has shown in the most tragic way how important the expansion of EU and the anchoring of Central and Eastern Europe were to the security, peace, unity, democratic transformation, and economic prosperity of the entire continent. What is missing now is to resolutely do the same in the Western Balkans too. Hence, I believe that now is the ideal time for the consistent efforts of North Macedonia and Albania to be acknowledged and met with acceptance by the EU as a joint commitment towards a more secure and stronger Europe, resistant to any third-party influence. If nothing happens now, certainly we will stay committed to EU reforms. But what will suffer instead will be the political momentum itself, and it will send a wrong message to the rest of the countries and the citizens of Western Balkans. This is not to say that we plan to abandon European path. Nothing of that nature. We are confident Europeans with great conviction, with almost 20 years of association agreement with EU, great acquis alignment, and implementation track record, and will continue along the reform path. Hesitating and envisioning innovative ways how to keep the status quo will not dissuade third malicious influence, but quite the opposite. It will attract it and double its ambition. And while envisioning models how to fight hybrid and cyber attack and disinformation, which are all surely needed and we will readily participate, EU should also make the next step towards EU integration of our region as the most effective way how to counteract foreign influence. In line with the new enlargement methodology, specific accelerated integration measures and gradual phasing in mechanisms along with strong focus on fundamentals should be put in place to feel the benefits of the membership already along the way. This was also in a way alluded to in the announcement of President Macron and UK President Michel when presenting the ideas for European political community or European geopolitical community. These are all valid initiatives on how to forge convergence and deepen operational cooperation to address common challenges, peace, stability, and security in Europe. But as President Macron, Chancellor Scholz, and President Michel underline, they shouldn't be built on the expense of the already precious 20-year-old stabilization and association process and the promise of the EU undertaken in Thessaloniki in 2003 that the end of this process envisages full-fledged EU membership. This vision was our beacon of light, and it shouldn't be extinguished. And what is most important for the next period is to primarily think and talk about economic and social convergence. Participation in the internal market could constitute an interim objective. As a powerful incentive for reforms, access to structural funds should also happen well before accession, based on tough conditionality. The process also needs to be streamlined to reduce the number of veto points and avoid bilateral blockages. All these are relevant points, but for the time being, the basic problem for North Macedonia remains. We cannot benefit from any meaningful innovation, let alone the new methodology, if we don't open accession negotiations. Because new ideas are becoming worthless to us, and this should be untangled with urgency. These are very unpredictable times, and we all bear the share of the responsibility to wrap it up quickly and allow for once normalcy in our EU integration process. What will follow will be a zeal of a small multi-ethnic country in the middle of the Balkans to compete freely and to prove its worth of joining the European family by the virtue of its own deeds. I expect that today's warm-up event, as well as the main forum that will take place in a few weeks in Ohrid, will provide an opportunity to share thoughts on how to achieve these lofty goals. With such hopes and expectations, I wish you all productive work at today's panel. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Minister. Well, as I said at the beginning, 30 seconds was far too short to wrap up 30 years of walking down the road to Brussels. When I started my professional career, it was just a few weeks before the last round of negotiations for the Stabilization and Association Agreement. And my expectation was that pretty soon this will all proceed further and I'll be an EU citizen soon enough. Then as things progressed or did not progress as we expected them to, I started dreaming about retiring as an EU citizen. And now I'm already starting to get thoughts of being an EU citizen in my life. It's been too long. Plenty of things have changed. Perceptions change, emotions change, or the love between the region and the European Union has changed. If I can say the love has changed. To illustrate this, Prespa Institute, the institute that I come from, started a research project several years ago. And in our survey, we asked this question, generally speaking, which country, international organization, or union, so that we allow a plenitude of answers, would you consider as the biggest friend of North Macedonia? 2 years ago, the first choice was the EU. Just 2 months ago, the EU is now the third choice. we are facing so many challenges, and I would certainly hope that we don't actually wait for these challenges to be met before we can say North Macedonia is a negotiating country or North Macedonia is an EU member state. But not just North Macedonia, every country represented at this panel today. And before the EU drops to not being on the list. The challenges that we are facing, and the Minister already spoke of them briefly, are not only speaking or challenging the credibility of the European Union, but they are also challenging NATO unity. They are also challenging defense in every possible meaning of the term. It's not only defense in the military sense. And it's also not defense against challenging coming from the outside, but also challenging that we are facing internally in all of our countries. I hope that we will be able to go into some of these challenges, give our arguments on an alternative, on alternatives 1, 2, 3, etc., and make it an interesting debate today. We have an amazing panel, and we will not speak as we are seated. You will see about that. Just before we begin with the first interventions, to know that everybody at the panel represented here will have up to 5 minutes of time to give his or hers first intervention. Then we will have a brief coffee break, and after the coffee break we will open the discussion with the present audience and give a wrap-up before 1:30 in the afternoon. So to begin, we have Peter Grk, Secretary General of the Bled Strategic Forum for the Western Balkans. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and of course thank you to organizers for inviting me. I'm going to take less than 5 minutes, I think. When we were preparing for the panel, I was, I think, discussing with Maria, and Maria asked me, do you think that this is the lowest point in the history of enlargement process? And I said, well, actually, I don't know, because there were so many low points in the history of enlargement process that it's very hard to count them all. But I'm not here to actually talk about them, but I would like to talk about the changes and the difference between then and now. With the Russian aggression on Ukraine, things have profoundly changed in European Union and in Europe as such. The context is now totally different, and you know, this saying that nothing will be as it was, although it's a cliche, this cliche right now is basically quite truth, and it's going to happen. So these tectonic geostrategic changes that we are going to see in the next years are going to affect everybody and everything. And they're going to affect also the relations between the European Union and the Western Balkans. Everything is going to change. And we are in the midst of looming crises, which probably are waiting for us already in autumn, be it the food crisis, be it the energy crisis, be it security crisis, and so on and so on. So with all these contexts, also the narrative has changed profoundly, I would say. The European Union has started or has embarked on a process where it was a time of reflection before, and now it's a time of action. Now it's a time of action. We had the future of the Europe debate, which ended on the 9th of May, and probably we are going to have another process pretty soon, which is going to try to implement all the ideas which came out of this process. And when we are talking about these ideas, of course, we can put them under the umbrella of strategic sovereignty or strategic autonomy of European Union. I would argue, and this is my first point, that no strategic autonomy of European Union is possible without the efficient enlargement process, and at the end, without the inclusion of the Western Balkan countries into the European Union. Because we face the same problems, we face the same issues, we are fighting against the same wrong ideas and values, and we are sharing a common continent. So when we are talking about the issues of the future, when we are talking about sustainable development, when we are talking about food security, when we are talking about economy, when we are talking about energy, it's impossible to achieve efficient strategic autonomy without a consolidated European continent. So I think this is something that we have to take into account, that this is now and before was then. If we are talking theoretically, before it was a time of reflection, and now with the geostrategic changes that are happening, it's time of action. And this is true, in a sense, also when it comes to the enlargement process. You know, for too long, this process has been stalling. I wouldn't say it's dead, but it's not quite alive as well. And we have been fighting, and this is something that I was saying for a long time right now, we have been always, European Union as such, dealing with strategic issues in a tactical manner. We always used tactical means in order to solve strategic questions. Well, now things have changed. Now it's time for European Union to actually start thinking strategically and geopolitically. And this is something which the President of European Commission, von der Leyen, said at the beginning, that we are going to be geostrategic. But if you want to be geostrategic, then you have to first consolidate what is at your doorstep. How can you play a meaningful role in Indo-Pacific? How can you play a meaningful role in the global community if on your doorstep you have a region of 16 or 18 million people which is in the heart of Europe, and where other players which don't share our values or norms are taking it as a hostage in order to address challenges and concerns which they're facing in their relations with the European Union. So to make this long story very short, since we are in the moment as we are, since we are going to embark on the implementation of the future of Europe debate, since we are talking about new European security structure which needs to change after the Russian aggression, since we are in the midst of trying to see how we are going to become independent in terms of industry, in terms of food security, in terms of energy security, now is the time to also find a way how to revive the enlargement process on a strategic basis. And to conclude, I'm not talking here only about European Union. also the region needs to do its part. It's always a two-way street. It always takes two to tango. So it's also the region which needs to grasp that with all the changes that are happening, with all the things that are developing right now, they need to start delivering on the reform processes, on being more active in solving the remaining political issues, on actually, having a strong voice coming from the region saying, we are here, we want to come inside, and we want to be a meaningful partner inside of European Union in order to make Europe a responsible global player in the international community. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So, geostrategic union cannot exist if there is not just capacity to be part of the global scene or become a global player, but if there is no capacity to resolve open issues internally. Let's keep that in mind. But before we go back to discussing the geostrategic union, let's listen to Maria Simeonova, from program coordinator, from the wider Europe program of the European Council on Foreign Relations in Sofia.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and hello to everybody. It's very nice to be here for a second year. I was here last year for the first edition and as an observer, but still, every time I come to North Macedonia, I feel warmly welcomed, and I wish this will stay the same. And I really wanted to start with a positive story, some storytelling, which I kind of yesterday thought about, but I left it for the morning. Then, during my trip, my drive from Sofia, and the 4-hour trip on a not so pleasant road, let's say, which is something we all need to work on, I thought that I will not come up with any kind of story because I felt no inspiration. But then, before entering Skopje, I met 4 people. And 4 out of 4 were so nice to me. So I realized that the positive story are the people themselves, and this reminds me of how I was feeling when I was a kid, going to Delchevo with my family because my hometown is very close to the border, and how warmly welcomed we were feeling. And I hope that this will stay same again, because we all know that there have been some issues. But I think this is the added value of what we are doing now. Connecting with each other, talking to each other, exchanging on a personal level. So I think we will all get any kind of conclusions that will help us address the blockage that we are at and the negative trends that we've been witnessing. But first I want to focus on something else and then kind of suggest some ideas and thoughts. I will stray away from bilateral issues for now and these hard talks because first I want to focus on the challenges for the region and to kind of outline what can be the role of the European Union and to start a discussion on this. As Peter started, he gave an overall picture. I would like to structure a little bit the discussion in a way that, considering the horrible circumstances and Russia's aggression in Ukraine, in the immediate reaction for the region was a scary one. I was with colleagues from the region on 24th of February, and I saw the fear. I felt the fear in their eyes because of what this could mean for the region and considering the history of the Balkans. So right now I think we can outline 3 types of risks and challenges, not only for the region, but for Europe as a whole. And first, these are the security risks. And logically, the threats for succession in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but not only this, we see security risks in the constant fight against corruption that's been characterizing not only the region, but also some member states. Organized crime, illicit financial flows. So there are many security risks in the region, in Europe, that the war, Russia's war against Ukraine is only exaggerating. From there, I would like to go to the economic risks for Europe. Because of the disruptions in the supply chains, we are witnessing high level of inflation, rising energy prices. And this is dangerous for my generation, because I think also for my generation in the region, because this is the first economic crisis of such scale. So it will be very important for us not to address it with economic means, solidarity mechanisms, but to cope with it even psychologically and to get out of this kind of pink world that we've been living, that we're working for convergence and higher standards of living. And from the economic risks, I would point out at the political risks. And here's the tough talk, because there are political risks, and they're hidden in the fact that they're frozen bilateral disputes, which, if not being addressed, will further diminish the credibility of the EU in the region, which is something we all want to avoid, no doubt about this. But not addressing bilateral disputes, not finding solution to each one of them is only paving the way for third actors whose interests do not overlap neither with the EU interests nor with the interests of the countries in the region. So I think naming those risks is very, very important. And here I would like to reflect on what's the role of the EU in addressing those risks. Does the Western Balkan countries actually see the EU as the one who will address the concerns in a sustainable manner, in an effective manner, and will lay the ground for a sustainable development, and will use this horrible act of violence as an opportunity to speed up the developments and the relationships between member states and aspiring states. And here, as Peter was talking about the geostrategy, and the last year when I was here, I wish that my personal wish is that we could talk about different status of the relations between member states and countries from the region. But since we are stuck again in this conversation, I would like to say that right now we need a consensus between the member states and the countries from the region, that we need a strategic approach on the horizon, and every step towards achieving EU's geostrategic interests will be vital. And it's not just the EU's role here, it's also the role of the countries from the region. And I am really happy that Minister Osmani highlighted the firm commitment of North Macedonia to the Euro Atlantic values and principles, no matter what happens after June. So I think this is very important, and this is my main message, that we should stick together. We should realize that the risks posed by the security threat in Eastern Europe affects everyone equally, and that the EU is now being changed. It's not the same as last year. The war changed the EU, and it has a solid base of foreign policy tools that can be harnessed in order to address all those risks that I've been talking about. On the economic crisis, re-energizing the Berlin process, strengthening regional cooperation. Those are just ideas that can be, of course, further developed. But on the security risks, the EU can support the countries from the region to strengthen their resilience and defense capabilities. And I think this will be well accepted in the region, considering the fact that we are witnessing war that almost nobody expected. On the political risks, the EU is a platform where countries with in disputes can kind of talk to each other, and the EU can support this process of bilateral talks. So I think that there is a momentum, but we need to think about how to make those further steps sustainable, so that any success right now will not fall victim to, for example, bilateral internal political spats, as we've seen. And the narrative should also change. It's not what the EU can do for the region, it's also about what the region can do for the EU. And the region can enrich the EU tremendously. So to this, I just want to conclude by going back to my initial words, that the positive story are the people themselves. And outlined the fourth risk that I see, and this is the lack of communication between the societies. We not only need better communication between the societies of the countries from the region, but we need better communication between member states and aspiring states, so that the gap between them, we can get rid of this gap, actually. So people-to-people dialogues will be very important, and I encourage that any one of us, whatever their position, can do something to progress on this front. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. So, what is the role of the EU, or do we see one in overcoming these risks? For this, I would actually go back to President Pendarovsky, what he said at his intervention yesterday at the World Economic Forum. And he says it's necessary for us to give support to Ukraine, because this is my addition, it's the civilized thing to do. But the policy of open doors, apart from NATO, must be applied to the EU as well, because without the policy of open doors, the concept of Europe, free and united, will only be a dream. Maybe Milena Lazarevich, Program Director of European Policy Center, can share some of the ideas of how to give the EU a role, and what kind of a role do we give the EU.
Thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure and honor to be here and try to contribute a little bit to this discussion, and to what I would like to call forward and constructive thinking, which can come from the region. I absolutely agree with Maria that the region's values and the most important part are the people, and those people need to actually find, and people who are involved in these processes need to find ways to be constructive and not only sit as passive receivers of EU's policies and EU's initiatives on how enlargement should happen, but I really think that we can be an active part. We can really play an active role, a proactive role, not only in how the EU will treat enlargement, on how EU will tackle enlargement, but also how it will tackle its own problems of its own member states with some of the countries in the region, but also help us within the region solve our bilateral and statehood actors. And here I would like to start with just offering a thought, offering an idea. This idea is part of a model which my think tank has proposed together with partners from Brussels on how to construct and reconstruct and improve EU's enlargement policy. But EU's enlargement policy cannot work if it does not tackle properly and in parallel, in my view, in parallel, the bilateral statehood and identity issues. I think that what is currently happening is that the accession process for our region, and particularly for North Macedonia and Albania, is falling victim of the EU's lack of a clear, proactive and constructive policy on resolving those issues. Bilateral dispute not only within the region, but also between EU member states and countries of the region, statehood and identity issues. I'm sure that when France and Germany decided to start European integration right after the Second World War, they had a number of bilateral issues between themselves. So EU integration is not about resolving bilateral issues and disputes and conflicts as part of the EU integration process. That has to happen in parallel. And I would say that just like the EU is not treating the dialogue and resolution of the dispute between Serbia and Kosovo as part of Serbia's or Kosovo's EU accession process, although sometimes those things still do get conflated, but it is a separate process. I would propose that the EU needs to start thinking, and we from the region can offer some ideas, I think, that the issues of identity, the issues of all sorts of bilateral issues need to be tackled separately. They need to be handled separately, and they should not be allowed to plague the EU's enlargement policy anymore. What is more, I would say that at the moment when the EU is at war, the current Bulgarian veto of opening of accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania is not only thwarting and obstructing EU's enlargement policy, it is obstructing and thwarting EU's security policy, EU's foreign policy. So the EU must not allow itself to fall victim in all of these other policies because of one bilateral, what they call a bilateral dispute. So this needs to become part of a separate policy. In addition to that, Minister rightly stated that the region needs more incentives. The region needs more support on its way to the EU. It is not only about offering support and incentives to political actors, and I come from a country where definitely I would say that political actors need some more support and need some more incentives, because otherwise we are close to drifting in the wrong direction. But people actually need to feel those benefits along the way. So the best way to offer benefits, to offer a sense of belonging to the citizens, is through what the minister also referred to, offering and opening access to structural funds much earlier in the process, with strict conditionalities, but still allowing our economies and our societies to catch up with the EU. So, because how are we going to catch up with the EU if we walk more slowly than the EU, and if our economies are not able to develop more quickly and at a greater pace than the EU's economies? But what I would also suggest is that we need more political integration. We need to be part of the EU's discussions. North Macedonia, Montenegro have adopted all the packages of sanctions against Russia, but their representatives are not sitting in those meetings when the fallouts and economic consequences of those sanctions are being discussed. So what we actually need is for our representatives to sit in those discussions, especially representatives of countries which have actually applied and aligned with those sanctions, I would say, because if we are not at the table, we get forgotten. We know that at the beginning of the pandemic, the EU initially forgot to exclude the Western Balkans from the ban of exports of medical equipment. And then they had to mend that mistake. Then at the beginning, when they imposed sanctions on Russia, they forgot to exclude our region from the exemptions of imports of Russian oil. And then they had to again fix that mistake. I would dare to say that this happens because we are not there. We don't sit there. And of course, as non-members, we cannot vote, but we can sit there, be observers, and we can play a constructive role. And of course, we can make sure that negative consequences on our economies are reduced. But we are, by asking for those for those things, structural funds, a right to sit at the table, we're asking for EU to do more for us. We also need to ask ourselves, what can we do to help the EU alleviate its own fears? And what is the EU afraid of right now? We have to be very clear about that. When Macron speaks about the need for the EU to reform before it can accept new EU members, he speaks about the fear of having new veto players around the Council table. We have to be very open and honest about that. We have to find ways to alleviate and to sort of offer constructive ways forward to the EU so that it can expand itself and really start talking about credible membership perspective for our region, to start talking about target dates, not promised target dates which will happen, no matter what we in the region do, but start to speak about target dates when the EU will be ready to take in new members, and not speaking about 2035 or 2040, speaking about this decade, and what the region can do and how the region can play a constructive role to make sure that happens. Again, going back to the proposal which my think tank, European Policy Center, prepared with our colleagues from CEPS in Brussels, we propose that there is what my dear friend Ardian called a safety period, and I loved how he actually referred to it, that the EU gets a safety period once we enter the EU. We become new member states, and as new member states, we practice membership for a while. We get a temporary regime regulated by our accession treaties, 10 to 15 years, the first period of our membership, where we would not be able to vote on unanimity decisions. We would not be able to veto EU's decisions. We would be able to vote on all qualified majority decisions, all simplified majority voting, but we would not be able to impose vetoes. Why is that important? Well, not only to make sure that the EU can check whether our democracies are performing properly, whether we are not backsliding, as it has happened with some member states of the EU that we know, but it can also make sure that the EU uses that period to reform itself internally, because this is ultimately where the EU's, I don't know if you can hear me now. This is ultimately where the EU's own internal reforms are going. I will just wait for a second. The EU's internal reforms are going exactly in that direction, in the direction of reducing the use and abuse of unanimity rule and veto powers in the Council, extending qualified majority voting to more and more policy-making areas. So the point would be for the Western Balkan countries to offer this kind of a token of goodwill in order to be able to accede to the European Union before it reforms internally, and allow the EU this safety period where the EU will be in parallel reforming itself internally. We would, in that way, I would say, become an avant-garde of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Milena. Before we continue, I'd like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for negotiating with Mother Nature the perfect weather conditions for the conference to take place outdoors. Unfortunately, they have failed negotiating with the Ministry of Defense for the choppers not to cross over. If you're not at the table, people usually say if you're not at the table, you're at the menu. Or on the menu, but I like your version of the saying more. If you're not at the table, you're forgotten. We are easily forgotten, or we have easily been forgotten for too long. Let's hope that we connect things better. Our next speaker is Ardian Hachkai, Director of the Tirana Connectivity Forum. Ardian, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Merci, Blagodaria, Faleminderit. It is an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you very much for making it possible. And I'd like to start by underlining the fact that, to the best of my knowledge, this is the only such event in the Western Balkans where the elites, the political elites, work closely with civil society actors regularly on a long time period and constructively. And I wanted to mention it, if only to provide the base to my thank you, but also because I will talk about the elites and the enlargement after all. Taking a hint from what you just said, I want start by saying to look up, and here I'm not referring to the helicopter, but to this movie, Don't Look Up, that has come up these last weeks, or Look Up, and by just saying that we have to be able to reflect, to see where the problems are, to accept them, even if we don't like them, so that we may be able to go forward. And I will start by saying that it is time that we sit around the table, and what Milena has been proposing, this staged accession, is I think one of the best proposals that we have in. Meanwhile, while we are going to the table, please refrain to come up with sayings like the future of the Western Balkans is in Europe. Because this is wrong. We have been in Europe before Europe. We have been part of the old Greek Empire. We have been part of the Roman Empire, of the Byzantine Empire. Help me with more. Ottoman Empire, Habsburg, some countries, lately I would say even the Vittorio Emanuele one. So we are very, very, very old Europeans. Thank you very much for this. This is the first thing. The second, European Union, it's a sui generis international organization that exists since 60 years, built to bring peace and to support economy in the European continent. For obvious reasons, we couldn't be part of these states at this time. Now we want to be part of this organization. Or do we? Do we? Actually, I would go by saying, I'm being a little bit provocative, if you bear with me. I mean, it's past 12 o'clock, so it's almost lunchtime. So basically, I would posit that when we talk about enlargement or accession, we talk about the accession of Western Balkan elites to the European Union, of our institutions, to be part of the European institutions. Why? Because already our infrastructure is connected. Our road infrastructure is part of the trans-European transport networks. Finally, this year we are having the Western Balkans corridor, which is also a nice follow-up of the Initiative 8 Minister that you have proposed and advocated last year. An excellent initiative. EU, our economies are entangled, are integrated with the EU economies. EU companies are the owners of our banking sector, biggest investor, biggest trading partner, you mentioned it. Our normative framework is the EU normative framework. We do not, at least Albania, doesn't have a foreign policy because we have adopted completely, totally aligned with EU foreign policy. And finally, our citizens, half of our citizens live in the EU right now. I mean, to call for my hydraulic, I have to call the guy in Düsseldorf and ask him when he will come back to Albania, right? So basically, this is to say that we are already part of Europe and in many ways part of different sectors into the European Union, and this is why we also must be part of the policy making into the European Union. I think this is normal, isn't it? This is the first thing. And second is because European Union countries cannot make it without securing their southern flank. Now we are talking about Trans-Adriatic pipeline, which brings gas from Azeri gas into the south of Italy. Now we are talking about dual mobility, military use of our transport infrastructure, how to connect Mediterranean with the Black Sea through railway, through Corridor 8, right? That connects all those countries. So basically, this is not for us, this is for you, but this is for us as well. So, and here I will come with a question that was asked to me in Zagreb 2 weeks ago. Is enlargement worthy for us? Okay? So what was the answer? Sorry. Right, I remember. I would say, in this model, it has been stuck for like 15 to 20 years. I mean, if it will be stuck for another 15 to 20 years because we are not looking at the light, except I look on my left with your proposal, I mean, we may be still stuck. So if something doesn't move for 20 years, probably, if it's not dead, it's nearby dying. So, but must we abandon enlargement? Never. I mean, we are part of it. Our institutions want to be part of it. And here I want to talk about the Berlin process. I want to talk about the Berlin process as a very interesting development that enriches the toolbox of the enlargement process. And widely it reaches the toolbox. What does it mean? First of all, Berlin process, by having a lot of untapped potential, brings tangible benefits pointing to the infrastructure for the citizen. This is very important. Enlargement toolbox is a little bit defective in the sense that they don't have in-between functions. It's either you're in or you're out. Either you get 100 million help from IPA, or you get billions of euros from the cohesion fund. So I think it's huge. So basically the Berlin process provides this, provides with an intermediary stage. It provides also something which is extremely important for the enlargement process. And here I'm talking about the legitimacy. The legitimacy. By definition, enlargement works with the elites, with political elites, and this is a very funny conundrum that I cannot solve. How can you work with captured states? How can you work with incompetent and captured elites? Right? Berlin process bypasses this by bringing in the real allies of the enlargements, which are the civil society as the closest representatives of the citizens, and the business sector through the Western Balkans investment framework. Provide intermediary steps, I said, and also focuses on the institutions. I mean, implementing huge infrastructure projects, for example, it's almost the same as adopting policies. And you can see if it works or not. I mean, if a road, while you can misappropriate different funds for different policies or legal frameworks, it's much more difficult to do it with a road. Either the road is there or the road is not there. Either the road has respected the standards or the road is has not respected the standards. So it's Berlin process for us is a litmus test for the quality of our institutions. And I will finish in the next 30 seconds within the timeline. But to work, it needs a proper governance mechanism, good governance mechanisms that does the follow-up in between two summits. By the way, I must start with this. No way it must replace the enlargement. If we put the enlargement aside, we will be like this island, that drifts into the sea. It will be very wrong. And we don't want to, we are very happy at 6. We are very happy at 6 for the enlargement. So, coming back to the Berlin process, follow-up between two summits, it needs to formalize the inclusion of the enlargement allies, which are civil society and business actors. We need to be able to provide our feedback to the decisions that are taken for us, and also needs to have some budgetary appropriation. I will stop here, and I also like to thank again the North Macedonia government for being a pioneering with this kind of organization, multi-layer, multi-actor, multi-sector. Thank you, Faleminderit.
Thank you, Ardian. So, is enlargement really working for us? Maybe we can continue looking for the answer. Demush Shasha, Executive Director of the European Policy Institute in Pristina. Demush, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon to everyone. Andrei, I call upon you to interrupt me if I exceed my time, because I'm notoriously infamous of talking too long. I like these kind of panels, and thank you for inviting me, because differently from state institutions, it allows us, civil society, to talk a bit more frankly and openly and limitlessly, actually, about all possible issues. Now, what I want to do today, well, the title of this event is Road to Brussels, right? So what I want to do today is paint a picture, send a message that one should be cautiously realistic about our road to Brussels. Actually, I think a better wording would be, one should be a pessimistic optimist about our road to Brussels. Now, I want to group my interventions in external factors that make me a pessimistic optimist and internal factors that makes me so. I want to start with a pessimistic note and end on an optimistic one. Now, let's start with pessimism and with external actors. As noted earlier, we live in unprecedented times of world insecurity and instability. And I want to mention 3 things to this end. First, I want to travel to a place very far from here, and that is Japan. So since 1947, after the World War, Japan relinquished its rights for maintaining military force. So looking upon what happened, the immense tragedy that humanity had witnessed, Japan said never again. We shall never anymore maintain military force, and Article 9 of its constitution forbids Japan to use military means as a means for resolving international disputes. This has lasted for 80 years. And it has been one of the pillars of Indo-Pacific peace. 24 hours ago, during his visit to Japan, President Biden said that he will authorize use of force if China invades Taiwan. More importantly, Japanese premier said that they will use irreversible force and do utmost efforts to defend Taiwan in case China invades it. And this just comes a few weeks ago when former Prime Minister Abe said that Japan will defend Taiwan if China invades. And what we are seeing, this is coming into a context when China has amassed record number of war troops close to the island. So this is historical U-turn in Japanese military doctrine when it comes to Indo-Pacific. Now, let's come closer to home, Germany. I won't dwell on this. I think you are all very familiar with unprecedented historic decision that Germany has taken to strengthen and advance its military capabilities in response to unprovoked Russian aggression. In what Chancellor himself, Scholz, said that this is a U-turn, a turning point for Germany in protecting the world security and world order. Now, one could say, well, this is just my interpretation of facts, right? It's not really that alarming, isn't it? I mean, this is just Demuth's interpretation of facts. Wouldn't it be great if we could know what world's most eminent thinkers, minds, think about current state of world affairs? Well, actually, we do know what they think. Since 1947, with the work of Albert Einstein and his Manhattan colleagues, they launched in 1947 what came to be known as Doomsday Clock, right? So Doomsday Clock is an annual publication, product of annual gathering and work of most eminent minds of the world, so Nobel laureates, most prestigious universities, statesmen, etc., former statesmen, etc. And what they try to do is warn, since 1947, to warn humanity how close they have come to a midnight, to an end of the world. Now, each year, Atomic Society sets the doomsday clock several minutes, several seconds closer to midnight, depending on how close the world is to destroying itself. What is interesting and what I want to note here is that the closest they have think ever that world has come to its obliteration was 5 times. So since 1947, 5 times they evaluated that the world is closest to destroying itself. First time is 1953, so testing of a thermonuclear bomb by US and Russia. That was 2 minutes to midnight. Four other times were consecutive years. And those are these last 4 years that we live in. And these last 2 years are a record-setting years, 100 seconds to midnight. So what I'm trying to say is that the unprecedentedness of volatility of world affairs has never been this great. Why is this important in light of discussion for regional future towards the EU? Because I believe that without a stable, prosperous, predictable world order, there cannot be a predictable, prosperous, stable Western Balkans path towards the EU. So that's my first point about why am I pessimistic about external factors that influence regional accession to the EU. Now I want to stop shortly about internal factors that make me pessimist. And here I want to use a useful exercise is that, well, first, my message about internal factors is that one of the reasons why region is not coming closer to the EU is that there has been no real democratic progress in the region for the last 20 years. Now, I make this a bit more ambitious and provocative statement, but follow me through. There is a useful exercise. Imagine yourself falling, God forbid, in coma 20 years ago. So imagine falling into coma in late 90s, huh? And waking up out of coma 2022. So what you have found out is that before you had fallen in coma in the 90s, in Serbia, people you would see on the TV, on the political spectrum, basically the leaders of the country would be Vučić, Dačić, Šešelj, if you will. Now, 20 years later, they are still there. Let's move to Albania. A hope, a democratic hope of Albania is Sali Berisha. Let's see Montenegro. I mean, Đukanović, even before you had fallen into coma, was running the country. He still is. Go to Bosnia and seeing what Dodik has been doing 20 years ago and keeps doing it today. Go to Kosovo, where I come from, where Hashim Thaçi is still a reliable, a real political option. So juxtapose now this. Juxtapose these political developments of these 20 years with what has been happening in Western democracies. Imagine the irony of Bill Clinton still being in power in the United States. Jacques Chirac being in Chancellery, being Helmut Kohl in Berlin. So this is unimaginable. So with this first point about internal factors, what I want to say is that if region has had a very sluggish path, progress towards the EU, it is ourselves to be blamed first. And that is because political elites have refused, old political elites have refused to open the way to change. You can't build future with the political figures of the past. And again, you might say, well, come on, this is just Demos' interpretation of facts. It's not really like this. Well, let's look into the facts and not my facts. But let's look into the objective facts of most reputable international institutions. What does Transparency International say? What does Freedom House say? Well, democracy, let's start with democracy, pillar of any progress of the society. Democracy is actually worse off in all Western Balkan countries today than 10 years ago, except Kosovo. Huh? Let's move to corruption. According to Transparency International, countries of the region are perceived more corrupt today than 10 years ago, except Montenegro and Kosovo. So my second point is that this is not really my interpretation. Facts are saying that there is very little progress in the region. Now, on an optimistic note, very quickly. One, with regard to external factors, I'm optimistic because what I see is happening across the world and forging, strengthening of alliances, transatlantic alliances, Pacific alliances that are courageously, starting from brave people of Ukraine and all the way to Australia and Canada, they are courageously standing up to the malign forces of the world. So this is rendering me optimistic. When I see how Europe has responded to Russia's aggression to Ukraine, it's a reason for optimism. When I see how Washington and European capitals, Japan, Canada, Australia, has united in deterring Russia and China, I'm optimistic. Internally, why I'm optimistic, and I finish there, is because of this event, because of why we are here. Prespa is a symbol of what region potential can be if path is opened to new political elites. Secondly, I'm open, yes, Vučić is ruling with an iron hand Serbia, but, it's a small but, it's a but. During last elections, a few weeks ago, a political party, a young political party, dominated by youth, green political party, pro-European Union, pro-NATO, Srebrenica recognizing, Kosovo recognizing political party, has came out third in Belgrade. And Belgrade is 25% of electorate. They have also entered Serbian parliament. So things like these in Serbia give me optimism. Things that are happening, what we are seeing in Montenegro gives me reasons for optimism. I'm ending here. I have talked more than I should have, but I end on a hopeful note. Thank you.
Good that you ended up with on the optimistic tone. My pessimism comes from I'm sharing your optimism of seeing the world dealing with the challenges at the world level. But my pessimism comes from seeing the geopolitical union dealing with the challenges at the local level. But I'm an optimist with experience. We continue further with more or less the same topic, and I apologize to all of you that we have been too extensive, but you have to believe that the Balkans have narrative history and they tend to talk. We continue with Jelena Jankic from the European University Institute in Florence on the same note, and we have another speaker joining us virtually afterwards.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having me, and thanks for the invitation. Now, it's a daunting task to speak after several very insightful interventions, so I'm trying to figure out how to not to reinvent the wheel, and I'll try to be very, very brief and to the point on 4 interrelated matters, also because I'm next thing to the last standing between us and the much-needed coffee break. So first thing, crises as the one that the EU and the region are going through, that the whole world is going through, also represents opportunities for growth. Whether they actually are depends on a number of factors, above all the political will to agree on a change. Now, turning enlargement in itself into a security issue might be problematic on a number of counts. It would also profoundly change and reshape the essence of what the EU is, as opposed, for instance, to NATO. So what would be the purpose of these different organizations? What would be their future roles, right? So this is something that essentially brings me to the second point I want to raise. What is the EU, or said better, what kind of the European Union do the Western Balkan countries seek to join? The EU in itself has changed substantively and profoundly if you think about the 2003 Thessalonica Promise. Obviously, there have been the 2004, the 2007, 13 enlargements, changing the numbers of EU members from 15 to 25, 27, 28, and then back again to 27. Now, the institutional structures of the Union have never fully adapted to this change, and this is something that's been brought up frequently by the European policymakers, and it's not just a say-so. It is the reality that they face on the daily basis. The EU has a large external border, which is also composed of countries, or it is with countries with highly contested internal political nature. The EU in itself has been going through a series of crises over the last decade, including the financial crisis, migration crisis, the Brexit, COVID, and obviously now the security crisis. The food and gas we're not going to talk about. That's something that expects us this winter, so let's not think about the things that are imminent in that way. But to consider these crises an opportunity, and an opportunity for the Western Balkans to rethink its future, to push the EU to rethink the enlargement strategy and its approach to it, we need to see what were the moments of unity, what were those pushes in those different crises that have pushed for a unified stance among the EU's member states. And that's not going to be easy, because perhaps the most important crisis that the EU is faced with at the moment is the crisis of democracy. And we've heard from a number of speakers here today that there is a rise of illiberal politics across the European Union, and I shall mention the Article 7 procedures against Hungary and Poland. The Commission has started the infringement procedures also against Malta and Cyprus. All matters that have to do with the rule of law and something that's considered to be European values. Now, if you think about the countries that are targeted by these initiatives, all of them are post-2004 countries at the moment. So we have to consider this in advancing in the course of EU integration for the Western Balkans. Now, the rule of law, due to all of these events internally in the EU, is becoming ever more prominent. Again, the question of the rule of law is also central to the question of what kind of the EU will the Western Balkans eventually, I hope so, in my lifetime, as you were mentioning, Andrei, join. Will it be a loose union based on economic cooperation? Will it be a deeply integrated European Union that is an expectation of some of the Western Balkan leaders? Or is it a differentiated union, which is something that we are seeing already in the EU when we speak about the two-tiered Europe or the multi-speed Europe? Thirdly, this region has also changed, and it's been changing. And it's been changing at different speeds. Now, in the context of accession, different countries here have different positions. I won't be reiterating everything that we know already. And there are, as you have rightly pointed out, different types of blockages. Blockages that are internal, the state of affairs in the Western Balkan states, the state of democracy, the state of corruption, economies, the rule of law issue, obviously, but also there are external matters that are kind of a blockage in the course of EU accession. The first type are procedural, which have to do with the EU's bureaucratic decision-making and the fact that it takes a long time. And this is something that Milena, perhaps in the context of the phased accession, should be considered, the timing of it, the process of it. Would it take the same amount of time, longer or shorter than the actual accession process in a different form? And the second one that we've heard from our colleague from Sofia is the political will, which is something very much different and which we don't have to emphasize enough in this country where we are sitting at this moment. So my final point is what future for the Western Balkans in the European Union, and what future for the European Union? Now, obviously, there are several different scenarios. One is the status quo, so nothing moves. And we've seen so far that this does no good to anyone. The EU in itself is considered inefficient, and it's well aware. The EU's institutions, the officials in the different member states, politicians are aware of the stalemate in process of integration, and they have different positions in this regard. In terms of the Western Balkan states, the status quo provides essentially an argument to slide into populism. So this is taking too long, so let's turn to different things. The second scenario would be the fast tracking, which I've heard promoted in the context of Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, but also in terms of the Western Balkans. I think that this is something that's a spur of the moment, and it is a bold idea, but it could also be politically and economically, especially politically, unhealthy. One, because the EU would be unprepared, and two, because the Western Balkan leaders would then get scarcely any incentive to change their societies and make them better for their own citizens. The phased integration, which Milena has raised, is a sort of a new solution. And I think it's very interesting, both for the Western Balkans and for the EU, to consider alternative routes, different routes to, in a way, awake the enlargement process from the coma that's been in for quite some time. But at the same time, we have to consider that it might be a somewhat of a double-edged sword. One, because I mentioned, the EU is a sort of a procedurally complex entity, so things might get complicated and timings might take much longer than what we expect. Then the question is whether that would lead, so right now we are faced with the enlargement fatigue. Would we have the phasing in fatigue as an outcome of the protracted phased integration? Again, this raises the question of what kind of the EU do we want to join? If that is the stratified, multi-speed, multi-tier EU, if that is the solution, then fine, but we have to accept that. What I would say here is that finally, we're all aware of the need for a new approach, for a new methodology, for a better system of incentives, for the development, and I think that this is where the future could be, the development of specific bilateral and multilateral forums for resolving political matters while administrative, institutional matters are resolved on the ground. And this would include a very clear incentive structure for the Western Balkan states to move ahead, to move forward. Because ultimately, and I'll close with this, hopefully on an optimistic note, what we all seek to achieve are the Western Balkans in the European Union and EU citizenship for all of the Western Balkan citizens. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jelena, and thank you for the optimist note. Let's listen to Professor Edward Joseph of Johns Hopkins University, and then we can have our long-awaited coffee break. Professor? We cannot hear you. By the way, the panelists cannot see you as well.
Hello?
Now we can hear you.
Now you hear me. Can you see me? Hello there. The video should be on.
Yes.
Can you see me as well?
Yes, yes, we can see you.
Great. It's very nice to be with you. Thank you all. Thank you, Foreign Minister Osmani, for the invitation. And I'm already learning a lot from the other speakers, and it's also an honor for me to join you. And actually, it was Foreign Minister Osmani who really put his finger on the issue and the challenge in the phrase, "We need to close ranks." We need to close ranks. And I believe that that phrase sums up the challenge for the Balkans, because the essence of the difficulties, as that phrase suggests, need to close ranks, is not in all sorts of complicated processes and innovations. It's really not all that complicated, the problem in the Balkans. It's divisions within Europe that have protracted this process, nearly 2 decades from Thessaloniki. It's divisions within Europe. So let me explain that very briefly, and then look forward to any additional discussion. So here's the question for all of us now. The world has changed on February 24th, as several have noted, but the Balkans haven't. The Balkans haven't changed since February 24th. And that's really a mystery why that hasn't happened, because we have peak transatlantic solidarity on the one hand, and we have peak uncertainty and weakness among pro-Russian forces in the region. So why haven't those two dynamics combined to have a breakthrough here in the Balkans? And I'll give you a couple of answers as to why I believe that is the case, why we haven't had that breakthrough. The first is that across the Atlantic, and that includes the United States and the key players, don't really understand and don't really want to tackle the underlying causes of the division. You see, the problems in the Balkans, these bilateral issues, which is a nice code phrase for this, they're really structural problems. They're not about, oh, we can get through this with some trade and some economic agreements and some dialogue. In January, I and colleagues from Serbia, Kosovo, and 3 of the countries that do not recognize Kosovo within the European Union and NATO put out a report. This was published by SAIS and the Wilson Center. It's called From Crisis to Convergence, a strategy to tackle instability in the Balkans at its source. And what we pointed out in this report is that the entire problem in the region really can be zeroed in on the inability to resolve the Kosovo crisis, which is where the dissolution of former Yugoslavia began. And what we noted is that the problem is structural. And today, we see that that structural problem still has not resolved. I'm going to explain that structural problem. What we face today is a situation where the entire region is blocked. Really, all 6 countries in the region are blocked by 2. Blocked by Serbia and blocked by Bulgaria. So these 2 countries block 6. And the reason is, as we explained, is really structural. In the report, we made the argument that what these, quote, bilateral issues, this nice term that people are using, which are really code for nationalism, ethno-national disputes. We made the argument that really the expression, it's not the existence of these ethno-national differences, they exist across Europe in many countries. It's that the expression of these ethno-national divisions and disputes depends on 2 factors. 2 factors, we stated what they were. One is national power, and the other is strategic orientation. And we can see those playing out in Ukraine today. Russia has ethno-national grievances with Ukraine. We know they've said that many times. Now we know there are other motivations, but the specific dispute and issues that Russia has are ethno-national. And because Russia is bigger and more powerful than Ukraine, Russia thought it could invade and impose its view of what ethno-national reality is on Ukraine itself by use of power. And because it's completely strategically oriented against the Western order, against the European Union and NATO and Western democratic values, it would use force. And actually, we see similar dynamics in the Balkans, in Serbia and in Bulgaria. Not identical, of course, not using force, but using national power. And using national power because of strategic orientation, specifically a pro-Russian authoritarian orientation in Serbia, and in Bulgaria because of pro-Russian strains in the country, and which prevent resolution and advancement of the dispute. Now, how does this work? Let me explain how, and we explain why these problems are structural in nature. Bulgaria is the clearest example. Bulgaria is a member of the European Union. Because it's a member of the European Union, it can block North Macedonia, which is coupled to Albania. So that's 2 of the 4. Now, Serbia is not a member of the European Union. So how is Serbia able to block? Also because it has the power of a European Union state. How is that? That's because 5 EU countries, 4 of them which belong to NATO, don't recognize Kosovo. And because they don't recognize Kosovo, their position is, we won't recognize Kosovo until Serbia does. So effectively, Serbia has the power of an EU member state. Serbia has the power of Bulgaria, the same way Bulgaria has this power. And because each of these countries have the power, they believe they can exert it. And that's the structural problem that we face in the Kosovo question. Now, it's a structural problem. It's not just that there are differences in views. It's that Serbia holds leverage over Kosovo. And because Serbia holds leverage over Kosovo, it has no incentive to resolve the issue. It's happy with the status quo. And Bulgaria, to some degree, is also happy with the status quo. It wants North Macedonia, basically, not to compromise. There already is a compromise and a method. It's in the Friendship Treaty. That already exists. But it wants North Macedonia, essentially, as Russia wants Ukraine, to acknowledge its subservience, its subordination to the Bulgarian identity. And so that's the structural problem. I agree, there are all these other concerns about the democratic progress and corruption, but we all know that the best way, the proven way to address these is through the European Union accession process. But that's blocked. And again, it's blocked because of these 2 countries, 2 Bloc 6. Serbia, because of the Kosovo issue, and because of the inability of the US and the EU to have leverage themselves over Serbia, Serbia dominates the polities, Serb polities, in 3 adjacent countries, Kosovo, Montenegro, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. And that prevents progress in those 3 countries as well. Croatia is already a member of the European Union, and Belgrade doesn't have the influence over the Serb polity in Croatia. And we see the difference. That polity participates actively as citizens of the country. But that's not the case in the other 3 that are not members of the EU. So that's really the problem. And again, the challenge is we have a great opportunity now. We have a terrific opportunity to with the war in Ukraine, not as one of the colleagues mentioned, because it makes things more complicated, it makes things easier, or should make it easier. We have a tremendous transatlantic solidarity. We have great awareness of the threat that Russia poses to the European order. And that includes here in the Balkans, where you all are. So, but we still do not have the movement by the US and its European Union partners to tackle these problems. And that's, again, my first answer is people simply don't understand it. The second is because those that do understand it don't want and have the drive to tackle it. In the case of Serbia, what we put forward in our report, we call it convergence, is very simple. The way to achieve the breakthrough on Kosovo, which would achieve a breakthrough in Serbia itself, and in Montenegro and in Bosnia-Herzegovina, would transform the dynamics and allow proper advancement and discussion about the Dayton Agreement in Bosnia-Herzegovina. This could all take place with a breakthrough on Kosovo, which would change the dynamics. If you listen to President Vučić, he even cites this. He says this himself. He says the main reason that Serbia will not align with the EU and put sanctions on is because of both Russian energy, but also Russia's influence on the Kosovo issue. So we can see that. It would also release this relationship, dependency relationship on Russia. But the second reason is, in addition to not seeing this, people don't want to tackle the issue, because the issue, the way to erode Serbian leverage and have a more equal discussion in the dialogue, in which a dignified, stabilizing solution to the Kosovo dispute could be negotiated under EU mediation, is by eroding that leverage. And that is principally in the 4 NATO countries, beginning with Greece, that could recognize Kosovo. And I would just mention here that there's nothing far-fetched about this. We see that Athens actually is prepared to recognize Kosovo. This is not some dramatic leap. The foreign minister of the country, Foreign Minister Dendias, has even given an interview posted on the Foreign Ministry website where he's explained this and given the reasons. He cites, in fact, the International Court of Justice report. So that's where it is. And then finally, I would just mention the key members of the European Union in Europe had a brilliant opportunity last week in Torino to advance resolution of this with Kosovo's application to the Council of Europe. But instead, they blinked, and they essentially deferred to the belief that there is a viable process, that the existing dynamics in the dialogue are satisfactory, and that this would somehow risk the dialogue. But the opposite would have been the case. Had the European members of the Council of Europe, those key members, approved this and sent it to the Parliamentary Assembly, it would have had a dramatic positive effect, both for the dialogue and immediately, as soon as Kosovo becomes a member of the Council of Europe, for Kosovo Serbs themselves, who would have had access to the European Court of Justice. And I will close on that note. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's leave some energy with our audience for the discussion later on. Sorry for being overextensive and too much overtime. The much-awaited coffee break now, and we will continue in, let's say, 12 minutes. promise that this time we won't spend more than 30 minutes discussing. And that's a hard promise, otherwise there are people here that would make me pay for that. So, thank you for deciding to stay with us. It's too long we've spoken already too long. We've shared our thoughts. Some of us gave some ideas, concrete ideas. Others pointed to difficulties or deficiencies. I think that it's wise if we open the floor immediately for questions or comments from the audience. We can spend, 20 minutes doing that, and then we can all go back to all of the panelists with a very, very brief and succinct final message. So. Do we have a microphone? We have.
That's okay. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Zoran Kovacevic. I'm deputy in Serbian embassy here in Skopje. A lot of things have been heard today regarding the enlargement process and all main problems in it. But my main thought after the first session is that world has significantly changed after 24th of February. We've been heard that region has not changed since then, but also my main thought is that the world has not also changed its narrative regarding Western Balkan and specifically Serbia. So Serbia is today a country which has explicitly said many times that it is not politically neutral. It is clearly oriented towards European Union, and it is our main political goal to become a member state of the European Union. My impression is that it is not heard in European Union member states, and instead we are receiving the whole old messages from 90s that Serbia is a main problem in the region and main problem in the world politics today. This is simply not accurate. It's also, it was also, somebody said that the politicians in the region are also old one and that are not, I mean, this is simply, this is the result of the democracy in the region. So all these politicians are elected in democratic elections. People voted for them. Some of them significantly changed their political orientation regarding the things that they were advocating in 90s. So, I mean, it is simply, it is fair to say that regional politicians developed through the years, become rather much more European oriented than they were previous. There is another that I would like to say that, for example, even today's Kurti's power in Pristina. Kurti is also not new politician. We know him 20 years ago and he was really active, so we cannot say that is simply the issue of democratic elections in the region and the will of voters. And may I also remind you that Serbia voted in favor of the resolution in the General Assembly of the United Nations condemning the Russian aggression to Ukraine. So it is simply not fair to to send an one-sided picture and to blame only countries of the region for the slow process of European integration today. So, I mean, bilateral issues always existed and they will exist in the future also, should be dealt, should be addressed, but they cannot be obstacle to the speed European integration process. Thank you.
Thank you. In my official capacity as moderator, but a non-official, a think tanker or representative of civil society, I appreciate your comment. I would only add a compromise solution. Politicians in this region are young, but they have long memory. But I see your point and I understand it completely. Anybody else wishing to speak? Ooh. We are either very shy or we are very tired. Simonida, please.
Thank you. Simonida Kaczarska, European Policy Institute, Skopje. Thanks to everyone. I know it was long, but it was, in any case, engaging. I think one of the things probably that was not mentioned that any of you would, if any of you would care to reflect on, was the Open Balkans initiative. And I think it might help for some of us to dispel some of the question marks that we have in our heads over this initiative overall. Just going back also to Peter specifically on the conference on the future of Europe. Us think tankers in the region tended to start, although we were not officially included, the Slovenian presidency did some effort to include the region. So if there's something that you can reflect from that process, specifically from the Western Balkans, just to keep us updated as to what is happening, and just a comment on Milana's discussion on the staged accession. We've engaged on a lot with this topic with her personally as well. For us, especially where we are in Skopje, it's very difficult, and I would like to reiterate some of the words of the minister. It's very difficult to talk about alternatives before we actually remove this obstacle, and to discuss revising the process seems at times as sci-fi or maybe even obsolete. So that's why we are very focused on getting this major hurdle out of the way, and then we will for sure accede in a very different union with a very different accession process. For that, I'm sure that we'll need to engage. Thanks.
Thank you, Simonida. Anybody else? No? Well, before we make it another round of up to 2 minutes, and this time I'll exert my moderator's right to, break your intervention. I don't want to negotiate how North Macedonia is, or all of the countries in the region are going to negotiate their accession, which will then be postponed for another safety period. I actually want to see this whole region moving ahead, full speed ahead. And in that sense, let's do a full speed ahead round of second intervention. Peter, we do the same order. Peter, we start with you. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. First thing, European Union is a strange animal because it consists of 27 countries, and what lessons learned we can draw from the past is that the European Union is very bad at keeping focus on different things. It can get easily distracted because you have 27 voices, because you have the 27 interests, and so on and so on. So just to answer Ambassador, yeah, of course, no issue, no bilateral question is one-dimensional. It's always, as I said before, it takes two to tango. But I think looking from the European Union perspective and from talking to different countries inside of the EU, we have a focus for a certain period of time. And when we see that things can't be solved or are not solved, we move on, because this is how it goes. And this is why I'm saying that it's also on the part of the region to keep the focus of European Union on the Western Balkans. And you can keep this focus with trying to find a compromise for most difficult issues. And Prespa agreement showed that it can be done if there is enough of political will, if there is enough of strength, political strength on both sides. So this is one thing. Regarding the future of Europe, I think if you look at the results of the debate of the citizens, especially, because I think also the citizens from Western Balkans participated, you will see that everybody, especially the young people, more or less think the same. We are the same. It doesn't matter, Western Balkans, European Union, it doesn't matter if we go to Iceland or wherever. In Europe, what young people and what civil society wants is pretty simple and straightforward. They want sustainable development, they want social justice, they want jobs, they want apartments, they want to live without borders, they need democracy, they want transparency, they need, or they want to end corruption practices. And this is all over the Europe. So I think the more the political elites listen to the citizens, the more chance we have to actually make things right in the future of not just European Union, but Europe as such. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Maria?
Yeah, so thank you, Andrea. I'll just kind of summarize my impressions, and I must say that I really feel glad that nobody enlargement is still there and it's still an option, and I'm really glad that on part of the EU and on part of the countries from the Western Balkans, what we have to admit is that it did have its shortcomings. But I heard many ideas here, starting from the Berlin process, from improving the enlargement policy per se, to the EU needing more geopolitical approach, geostrategic approach, and so on and so forth. So what we need right now is a new package, improved package to the aspiring countries, which does not exclude enlargement, of course, because, as I said, it's been said a couple of times that it's still on the horizon. What's needed right now in the region and in the relationships between the region and the European Union is this people-to-people approach, better communication on societal level. And on the other hand, the EU harnessing its toolkit of instruments that can be put in favor to the region in tackling the challenges it's facing right now. For example, the war exposed our vulnerability to Russian natural gas. It's not just the EU countries, it's also the region. The question here is, do we want to achieve independence from the Russian natural gas, and how the countries from the region and the European Union can work towards this goal? And here again, I will say that it's not what the EU can do for the region, but it's the other way around. And energy security, renewables is a starting point. So that's more or less how but I'm really glad that we kind of have agreed on the basic shortcomings and on the most urgent things that need to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Milena?
Well, I will actually use my 2 minutes to address Simonita's questions. First of all, I fully agree, and I always actually say in panels, maybe I didn't reiterate it today, that no improvement of a methodology, of a process can work or deliver anything unless this first obstacle is removed. And this obstacle of the Bulgarian veto is not just an obstacle for North Macedonia. It is truly an obstacle for the entire region, because the leaders in other countries see what is happening, and they see that you can deliver on difficult political issues and then get nothing in return for years, which of course then affects you in short term politically. You can end up being out of power, and the whole thing was then useless. So for the EU's credibility towards the region to actually to be restored, this issue needs to be tackled. But again, I'm saying I think that the EU needs a separate drawer for these issues. These issues can no longer keep popping up in the enlargement process. North Macedonia is North Macedonia today because it was blackmailed for years by another member state. If we keep every time waiting for years for a compromise in order to be able to continue the accession process, then none of our countries will ever get into the EU, because there will always be a next member state which will come up with some identity, border, language, whatever issue, and that will again become a problem of the EU accession and enlargement policy, instead of being in its own drawer, which needs to be created. And this is why I'm going back to my initial thought that the EU needs to construct and pursue a separate policy and a conscious policy on these issues, in order not for these issues to be treated as an elephant in the room until it just breaks your table and all your china in the China room. On the Open Balkan initiative, I will just say that I think that any initiative of regional cooperation which takes the region closer to the European Union and which is inclusive and has the capacity and manages to include all of the countries in the region, and which takes them closer to the satisfaction of EU norms, EU rules, regulations, closer to the EU's internal market, etc., any such initiative is a good initiative. Whether the Open Balkan Initiative today satisfies these criteria, I'm not sure. But I think, and I hope that it has the potential to come closer to satisfying these criteria. If it does so, then it can be merged with a common regional market initiative, and there will be no question and no problem at all.
Thank you, Milena. Ardian?
Thank you, Milena, again for the perfect transition. So I'll start with the Open Balkans. Actually, I don't know what it is, because we have not seen any document that defines what is it. It's like the Loch Ness Monster. So, however, I fully agree with you. From the moment that somebody takes the time and puts a couple of pages, saying what it means, what are the objectives, what are the structures, the mechanisms, any budgetary resource or human resources, whatever, that makes an initiative an initiative, I think it will be great. I mean, the idea is fantastic. It's great. We like the idea a lot. And we hope it will be developed into something sustainable. And also, it will be great if instead of the prime ministers, the same, always talking about it, we would have some ministers talking about it. So that will be cool, or some directors of departments, etc., etc. So this is about the Open Balkans. About the politicians that change. Yes, indeed, they change. And what I want to underline here is that notwithstanding their youthful look, I'm talking about my prime minister, even with a beard, now he has changed. He has, I think, like 30 plus years of political experience and negotiating with the EU. So those guys, they have been masters of negotiation. So whoever changes and comes up in, I don't know, in the member states and the European Commission comes to Western Balkans and discuss, they have in front of them masters of EU negotiation. I think this is a huge achievement of our politicians. The other point is that regarding the, I want to say about staged accession and, I mean, about this idea. We are talking about improving the enlargement new methodology, which I don't understand how it can work. how the first cluster can condition the progress in the other clusters. There are no benchmarks, there are no indicators. I mean, it's a typical product of somebody that sits in Brussels, you know, in the DGNIR. I hope you remember DGNIR still. So the idea is to add to this administrative power and to the financial power of the Commission to add some legitimacy. And this is why we put all our weight on the Berlin process, because it's the only process that has involved the closest representatives of the citizen that the Balkans have, which is civil society and think tanks. And this is a little bit what is happening too right now, so I am still hoping that it will be tweeted somehow, but we'll do it, that this example, this press platform, this platform must be, let's say, also repeated in other countries. And I will stop here.
Thank you, Ardian. And now, Demush, can we continue with the optimism?
Several things on Open Balkans. First, it is very clear that more regional, and it's very welcome to have more regional cooperation. Let's take one example to illustrate it. Just now, Frontex published statistics data on illegal crossings into the EU for the first 4 months of 2022. To put into context those data, note that last year, 2021, was the first year when illegal entrance into the EU surpassed pre-pandemic levels. So there is a surging entrance of illegal migrants into the EU. That is last year. And the first 4 months of 2022 are showing an alarming trend where, compared with the 4 months of 2021, there is a 69% increase with 2021. So it's as it seems, we are beating the record-breaking year of illegal entry into the EU. And the alarming part about us is that half of those illegal entries came from Western Balkan route, which in itself is 130% increase compared with 4 months last year. So clearly, there is a need for stronger regional cooperation, just to make one example. But what is the problem with Open Balkans? 2 problems. First is an original sin. Second is current deficiencies. Original sin is the fact that 3 countries came together and launched Open Balkan Initiative without clear goal. So it was more of an act of frustration, a scream, a cry of frustration towards injustice of EU for not opening accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia, and basically suspending Serbia's EU accession process. So it was seen as an act of desperation, of protest, rather than a well-structured idea whose goal is to strengthen regional cooperation. So therefore, from this original sin, everyone really had fallen back and really kept their distance from the suicidal undertaking of the initiative, if you will. Now, what are the current deficiencies of the initiative? Few were mentioned, so let's structure them along 3 clusters. So first is participation and leadership. So take, for example, Berlin process, which is a regional initiative who has the same objectives just like Open Balkans.
Sorry, if I can ask you to be more succinct. We can take your optimism the whole day, but we first have to take some food into our bellies.
Very quickly. So in the Berlin process, you have 17 member states participating, including all European partners. In the Open Balkans, you have 3. So why would you join a structure that removes from the room all your European partners? And this is in particular alarming for a country like Kosovo, when we hear Vučić, president of Serbia, saying, well, we should take the fate of our region in our own hands. Well, we know what happens when Serbia takes the fate of the region in their own hands. So that's with regard to participation. It's illogical for the region to remove European partners from the cooperation mechanism that exists within the Berlin process. Second is financing, very quickly. So basically in the Berlin process, you have billions of funds available for regional projects, infrastructure projects. In the open Balkans, you have 0 funds available for infrastructure projects. And finally, administrative structures. Any regional cooperation needs administrative structures to work and deliver. There are clearly established administrative structures under the Berlin process. There are no administrative structures under the open Balkans. So this is why open Balkans suffers from the original sin, and this is why it faces currently serious deficiencies, which, if addressed, can render it useful, but as it looks, it doesn't.
Thank you, Demush. Yelena?
Thank you so much. I'll keep it to 4 very brief points. Now, both in academic circles and in politics, there's the question of who's responsible for the slow progress of the Western Balkans in the context of EU accession. But I think we should perhaps rethink this focus and focus on how to find solutions for issues. And this will obviously not happen overnight, because whichever solution there eventually will be for dismantling the enlargement stalemate will have to work for different parties. It will have to work for the EU above all, because if you think about the EU as a sort of a club that you want to join, whatever happens has to work for the EU. The EU in itself is not a monolithic actor, so it's composed of the different member states, of the different institutions, all of which have different priorities and interests in the context of enlargement. So consolidating all of these should be a priority. Now, again, the solution will need to work for the Western Balkan states and for the region as a whole, I think. And this is what brings me to the Open Balkan Initiative. And I think that we've pretty much covered much of the grounds of where it is positive, where it should or could be made better, and the fact that the Open Balkan Initiative, in order to work, would need to be inclusive and well-structured and streamlined. So I think that this is the key. I think Simonida raised the question of the Conference for the Future of Europe. Tomorrow, or actually in the next 3 days, there will be a major conference in Positano near Siena, and we have created a position paper that also includes the European perspectives of the Western Balkans. So this is something that we'll discuss tomorrow as a part of the Working Group 3 in that conference, and it will be presented to European policymakers who will be there at the event. And now finally, I just want to leave it at this. I come from academia, and I think that what is important in the context of EU enlargement and EU accession is to think together of...
Yes.
The guests can also see you.
Terrific. That's great. 3 points in 2 minutes. Open Balkans. First, I agree with the concerns raised by Demush about this. Here's a phrase that I use. You can quote me on it. I've used this many times, including with senior US and EU officials. Trade does not equal trust. Best example, look at Ukraine and Russia. They're big trading partners. Look at China and its neighbors. Trade between China and Japan, South Korea, Taiwan has exploded. Huge amounts of trade. No trust. In the Balkans, Serbia is Montenegro's #1 trading partner, both imports and exports. Do you see a lot of trust there? So we have to be very clear. It's not just about trade. Oh, trade is this magic formula. It's about the character of the country that you're trading with. If you have a larger power, one like China, like Russia, that wants to project its influence and is not democratic, is authoritarian, you have a problem. And that problem exists today, of course, with Serbia. Larger economy, authoritarian direction, pro-Russia direction. Second, I agree with the Serbian ambassador that bilateral issues should be addressed and must be addressed. And the way to do it is in accordance with EU values, with mutual respect, and not with power, exploiting power asymmetries. That's what Russia does. Russia exploits, or tried to exploit, its relative power over Ukraine to impose its own. And we can't have that in the Balkans. We cannot have Bulgaria vetoing North Macedonia and in demanding and imposing its view of what the Macedonian identity should be, that it should be subordinate to the Bulgarian identity. No people would accept that. Albanians, no one. Ethnic Albanians, no. Croats, no one in the Balkans would accept such terms. And we need to be very careful and precise, especially in a forum like this, about using the words dialogue and compromise. We need to remember that North Macedonia already compromised and already had dialogue with Bulgaria. It's called the Friendship Treaty. That's the basis. And EU values: respect peace agreements, respect Ohrid Agreement, respect Prespa Agreement, let's respect the Friendship Agreement. That's where the resolution lies. And then, of course, we have the Serbian veto, as I explained, over Kosovo. This leads this power imbalance, which Belgrade exploits. We need to create the conditions where both Belgrade and Pristina have the incentive to negotiate, here's the key words, a dignified, stabilizing solution. We cannot have the same structure that led to the land swap. The same structure, it still exists. The same power imbalance that led to the land swap proposal, that still exists. The same type of non-stabilizing, non-dignified result is where the dialogue is headed. And finally, I just note Serbian ambassador mentioned, which was very welcome, that Serbia is not neutral, that Serbia is pro-EU. We have a saying here in the United States, I'm sure it's also in Europe, also used, which is action speaks louder than words. The way to demonstrate that is not just with the UN General Assembly, which many states have signed on to. It's by those other states, Africa, Latin America, many states signed on to the UN General Assembly, but they don't have the privilege of joining the European Union. It's a privilege to join the European Union. It's a privilege to be an EU candidate and get benefits even prior to membership. Of course, EU membership is the ultimate benefit, and that is no substitute for that. But Serbia enjoys a great privilege by being an EU candidate, and therefore with privileges come obligations. The obligation is to join with the European Union and impose sanctions on Russia, as it is being asked to do by the EU and by the United States. And that is the proof. Actions speak louder than words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Joseph. And to the most persistent of you and most dedicated of you, thank you for staying with us until the end. I know that there are interested people in continuing this discussion or opening new topics for debate. Please carry those topics towards the fresher parts or the covered parts of this venue and continue the discussion in small groups over refreshments. Thank you all again, and thank you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for having us for this pre-conference Road to Brussels.